We talked last week a bit about how March 24th, I believe, is the day that the Supreme Court is finally going to hear arguments in the Michael Newdow pledge case.
That's correct.
Where he basically made the case that, for the government to require compulsory recitation of the pledge when it contains a religious statement.
No, I got to correct you there.
Yeah.
This is tricky, and there's been a lot of false reports about what this actually, what the structure of the argument actually is.
Okay.
The law in California that he challenged required teachers to lead the pledge.
Okay.
It didn't require students to say the pledge.
Okay.
Right. So it was compulsory, but only in a particular way.
Right.
Though, of course, this raises the specter of coercion of students to go along and do as they are expected.
Sure.
In exactly the same way that the high school football game prayers in Santa Fe, Texas, a couple of years back, did that same thing, and that was found unconstitutional.
Right.
Right. So.
So the teachers were compelled.
Yes, the teachers were compelled to conduct the exercise.
And as a practical matter, the students were more or less compelled, because who isn't going to?
Right. I mean, it's still a captive audience,
Yeah.
and it's still the government officially leading this activity. You know, it has all of the elements that are necessary to, identify it as government-led.
Yeah.
Right.
So, now there's this thing you do in Supreme Court cases, or in any court case, I understand, or certain kinds of court cases. That's called an amicus brief. An amicus brief is a document submitted by some group other than the plaintiff or the defendant that supports either one side or the other, right? It says these are the reasons why we think that side is right. And the atheist community of Austin was invited to submit an amicus brief on Newdow's behalf in the Supreme Court case that's coming up.
Right. Now, can these amicus briefs actually have an influence upon the outcome of whatever decision is made, since the people filing them aren't actually either plaintiff or defendant? They're not directly involved in the case?
I think that their purpose is to simply make sure that the judges are as informed as possible about all of the different viewpoints concerning the case.
Right.
Right. It's to make sure that apart from the specific arguments made in the courtroom, other viewpoints that are relevant are in the judges' minds.
Okay.
So I would guess that, a lot of the questioning that comes from the bench in the Supreme Court is driven by them having received these arguments.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Okay.
And they present the two sides in the case with the arguments to see whether they can refute them. So I volunteered to write a brief on behalf of the ACA, and I was happy to do that. It's very, very exciting to think that anything I wrote would go before the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that's
like terrifying.
That's pretty cool, actually.
And I wasn't the only one. Manda also wrote a brief, and in fact, what actually occurred is several different atheist organizations got together and submitted their briefs to a single lawyer who is putting them together.
Oh, I see.
And to submit a brief on behalf of all those different organizations. It makes the brief longer, more detailed, and represent more people, these are all good things.
Yeah, very good. Okay.
So what I came in here to talk about today is the amicus briefs on the other side. Because to prepare for mine, the first thing I did is I went to Michael Newdow's website, www.restorethepledge.com, where amicus briefs in defense of the phrase "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance are posted for people to read. And I read some. And you wouldn't believe the kind of nonsense grown men are submitting to the Supreme Court in defense of the idea that we ought to not only keep having the pledge, but keep having it with the words "under God" in there.
Yeah, after 4 years of this show, I don't think there's anything that we could say about anything that would shock me.
Well,
but you never know.
There's a difference between, just people in the community who are, just have a personal interest in religion issues, right?
Sure.
And have their personal views, and it's just, there's not a big stake. It's, they're interested in asking us questions and stuff. That's all fine, but these are lawyers, right? So
okay.
lawyers representing people who care how this case comes out.
Interesting.
Submitting arguments that are just so completely vacuous.
But from what
you will be amazed. I guarantee
what you were
it.
saying earlier, though, this is normal people who are not involved with the case submitting these arguments to the lawyers.
But those people can be lawyers, though. I mean,
But no,
Well, they
but my
could be,
point is, yes, ultimately,
But
it's not quite that straightforward. I know that in our case, the briefs have been submitted by the different organizations to the lawyer. The lawyer is using those the text we sent them as basically building blocks of a legal argument.
Yeah. But
so he's not even like he's not even paraphrasing us or cutting and pasting. He's making an entire new argument.
Yeah.
Right.
But that argument,
he's reformulating all of the stuff we've said to make it, pass constitutional muster.
but is he bound to use those documents and basically just clean them up in a sense? Versus,
That's a good question.
Because if he has his own input in it,
I know.
Can he throw out all these arguments that are completely waste of time?
Apparently yes, because there are things that I wrote in the brief that I submitted on behalf of the ACA that have not made it into his final document.
Yeah.
Right, and that's fine. I mean, his job is to make sure that the final thing is persuasive.
Exactly.
So it does appear that the lawyer can do that.
Okay.
Right. His job is to make sure that what gets submitted is worthwhile.
Yes.
You want to hear what lawyers had thought was worthwhile in the arguments in favor of under God?
But before you start, you don't have to submit your amicus brief through a lawyer, do you? Or do you have to?
I think you don't have to, but if you
So some
what
of
the
this
guy's done in our case is
well, I'm just saying that some of these pro under God amicus briefs might not have been vetted by a lawyer before they were submitted. That's all I'm saying.
These ones were.
Oh, these were.
You can tell when they were. I mean, it says the name of the lawyer. That.
Oh, all right. Okay, I didn't. That wasn't clear.
No, this is not just people off the street.
Yeah.
All right. This is lawyers taking actual arguments submitted to them.
All right. Okay.
And their job is to
make it make sense.
Find constitutional support for those viewpoints, and then present that to the Supreme Court.
All right. So lay them on us.
Reciting the phrase under God is just ceremonial deism. The contexts of ceremonial deism are patriotic and not religious, and are not part of the ritual of any single religious group. Such references are typically short and generic, as is the reference to God in the pledge. Now, what's wrong with that?
I think I have one.
Okay.
I thought, it says ceremonial deism is patriotic. Well, I thought that patriotism had to do with your loyalty and love for your country. It didn't have anything to do with whether you believed in a big invisible man or not.
I think that is correct.
Okay.
This is simply an assertion that in order to be patriotic, you have to believe in God.
Yeah.
And another one in there is the fact that they said upholding one belief, something along those lines. Well,
they say it's not part of the ritual of any single religious group.
Okay, so it's not any single religious group, but it's monotheism, so it's not Christianity. It's Christianity and Judaism and Muslim and stuff like that, but it's still leaving out any non-theists or
it's not identifying itself with any one doctrine.
So whether it supports 1 or 50 doesn't really matter because you're not including everybody.
That's right.
You're still leaving people out.
Let me jump over to another argument. We'll come back to this one in a second. Okay. Another form that this has taken is the statement, patriotic invocations of God do not attempt to establish a state religion, nor suppress the exercise or non-exercise of religion. Now, this is that whole, the separation clause only says that the government can't establish a single state religion.
Yeah.
But this is nonsense.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, what they are asking us to believe is that the Founding Fathers all only wanted to make sure there wasn't a single state religion. They want us to believe that as long as the government expresses a bias in favor of a group of religions that contains at least two,
then that's not.
that even if all other religions are then being excluded, thank you, then it's okay.
That's fine.
And that's absolutely ridiculous. You know, that freedom of religion does not stop at, well, we can't take a subset of all religions and we can't take just a specific religion and call that the main one. You can't take a subset of religions, the monotheist religions, and say those are the official ones that will get the stamp of approval from the government either. There are all kinds of religions out there and viewpoints that are not religious, like atheism, that are all protected equally under the Constitution.
Or should be, at least.
Yeah.
Well, they
are.
That's what the Constitution
Currently they
does.
are. Currently
Whether,
they are.
you know, yeah, right.
But what I always find so ironic about the pro under God side, or what I call the theocratic side, because that's what it is that excuse me, they ultimately always end up backing up until they're up against the wall, and they end up with an argument which is always some variation of, well, it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
So that's why we should keep it in.
That's the whole ceremonial part of ceremonial
but that's the
theism.
irony of it, because it's like, it seems to me that clearly it does mean something, otherwise the believers would not be fighting for it so passionately.
But it's not just that. I mean, imagine, if you will, that that somebody were to argue before the Supreme Court that slavery is okay as long as it's just ceremonial slavery.
Yeah.
Right? Just saying that something
Racism,
is ceremonial
yeah.
does not make it any less offensive.
Yeah.
Because what you're saying when you do that ceremony is you're saying this thing we have a ceremony about, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And that's not the government's job when it comes to religion.
Yeah.
Government needs to remain neutral on religion.
You don't have ceremonies about things that don't mean something to you.
Well, that's
too.
it. I mean, that's true too.
Yeah.
Right. But even if it is a ceremony, right? I mean, it doesn't mean that you can expect people who are offended by the thing you got the ceremony about not to be offended or not to be excluded.
Yeah. Right.
It just as it excludes them and offends them just exactly as much.
Right.
Right? You can't hide behind claiming it's just ceremony.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to another argument. The phrase under God simply acknowledges the historical fact of our founding fathers' religious belief. Do you buy that?
When was under God? The first question? When was the nation founded again? Founding fathers?
That would be 1776.
Okay, and when was under God put in?
1954.
Bit of a
Okay.
gap there, wouldn't you say?
That's
Bit of a gap.
Yeah.
Plus, it does not say, the pledge does not say, one nation founded by theists.
No.
Right? It doesn't say that.
Yeah.
It does not say, does not state it as an historical reference. It's stated as a comment about the nature of the United States. That's what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
Similarly, they make I've heard the argument, the words under God merely acknowledge religion rather than promoting it.
So what? It's not the government's business to acknowledge religion.
Yeah.
Plus, it doesn't acknowledge all religion.
Yeah.
Yes.
It acknowledges only the subset of religions that are monotheistic.
Yeah.
And not even all of those, because I'm pretty sure no Muslims are deluded into thinking
That anybody's talking about them. And
that they're talking about Allah. Even though they are a monotheistic religion, it's pretty darn clear in our culture that they're talking about a particular one. But even if they weren't, even if they want to claim it's generic, that the whole generic argument only goes so far.
Yeah.
It does not go so far as to extend under God to cover things like Hinduism that has multiple gods, Buddhism that is a religion with no gods, or atheism, which is the lack of religion. It just can't cover all of those things.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's exclusionary.
It's just a lot of verbal legerdemain, right? It's just they want to It's an acknowledgement rather than a promotion.
Yeah.
It's ceremonial, not official.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Right.
an app. You know, they're just trying to make these various apples aren't oranges.
Exactly.
You know, analogy, but it just doesn't really fit to the situation at hand.
By the way,
calling something by a different name doesn't make it something else.
I learned something about this ceremonial deism phrase when I read the early drafts of the brief that the ACA has contributed to.
Okay.
The lawyer in that case went and checked, and he discovered that the whole concept of ceremonial deism, it's not an official legal viewpoint. It's just a phrase that has been used in commentary on some Supreme Court decisions by the justices who were trying to explain their point of view.
Okay.
It comes from a lecture by a law professor who didn't say that there is such a thing as ceremonial deism and that makes things like under God and the Pledge okay. What he said in his speech when it was originally coined is that there would have to be something like an official recognition of the concept of ceremonial deism in order to make under God and the Pledge okay.
Okay.
There would have to be an official recognition. There's never been an official recognition. There's just been a couple of justices in a couple of cases that have referred to his speech and said, yeah, it's kind of like that. That's the reason why it's okay.
So there is not actually anything that actually exists in terms of in a legally defined way.
Right.
That is ceremonial deism. That's understood to be a thing. You know,
that has legal
standing
power or
anything.
authority.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, there's no such thing.
Okay. So this is just some sort of phrase pulled out of someone's hat.
Yeah.
And
it's a blanket term for a bunch of excuses.
And apparently the way they've quoted that law professor sounds like, you know, when some movie review comes out and the critic says, "Boy, this movie sucks so bad, it's amazing," and then on the poster they just put the word "amazing."
Well, I don't know. I don't actually know what the original what the stance of the person who made the original quote was. He may have been in favor of the Supreme Court adopting that view.
Yeah.
He may have been in favor of it.
But he was not identifying anything in some sort of legally binding sense.
That's correct.
That you know, said here is something called ceremonial deism.
All he said was that it would take something like that in order to justify a wide range of things that the government does.
I see. Okay, interesting.
That are religious.
Okay.
Okay, here's a good one.
Okay.
Under God and the Pledge has become part of the fabric of our society.
Since 1954.
Yeah.
And it was not a part of our fabric of our society for 200 years previous to that.
Well, I mean, there is that. There is that.
But
plus,
again, it's immaterial, right? MTV has become part of the fabric of our society.
Right.
Going back to what you
doesn't
said,
mean
slavery was a part of our society.
Yeah.
Slavery was part of the fabric of our society for quite a long time.
Yeah, several hundred years.
Being part of the fabric of our society is not an excuse.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of things that, there's sort of a corollary to this is the claim that, well, you know, various founding fathers said religious things. Well, yeah, various founding fathers owned slaves.
Yeah.
Just because the founding fathers did it does not mean it is something that we ought to be doing that is constitutional or ought to remain constitutional if the Constitution is simply silent about it.
And again, our founding fathers understood the legal distinction between, you know, what it was that an individual was allowed to believe and profess and what have you, and whether or not the government had any business sticking its nose in that.
Well, mostly.
Yeah.
There is the one big sticking point on that, the one big example that I think Christians can validly point to as an example of founding fathers doing something officially religious through the government is congressional chaplains.
Okay.
But really, it's not relevant. Just because there's a thing that they did that is just because they did that thing does not in itself prove that the thing they did is okay.
Yeah.
Even though they were the guys that wrote the Constitution.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the part of our culture thing. Here's one of my favorite ones.
Okay.
Because it's so immediate. It's so easy to immediately rebut. The pledge has none of the trappings of a religious ceremony. Well, it's got one. It says God. That's really the whole point of the challenge to the constitutionality of the pledge that currently stands. It's got one of the trappings of a religious ceremony in it.
Yeah, acknowledging a deity.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is that you will hear specifically Christian fundamentalists try to claim that just because you're talking about God in a highly reverent, worshipful way doesn't mean you're doing anything religious. Right? I've spoken to a lot of Christian. I've spoken to a lot of Christian fundamentalists who say they completely disdain the very concept of religion. They're like, oh no, religion, tooey. I have a personal relationship with Jesus, and they try to make that distinction. And I think that is the thinking that is behind that argument there. Just because you acknowledge that there's a God doesn't mean it's a religious statement. Well, but in fact, I think though that there is a legal definition of what constitutes religion. And it has to do with some sort of acknowledgement of a supernatural higher power or a deity and reverence toward that deity and what have you.
And so, I find it extremely ironic that the same folks who will pretend that talking about God is not itself religion will turn around and make the claim that if we don't talk about God in our public schools, that's atheism.
Yeah.
They can't have it both ways.
Well, they seem to. Sure, they can. They do all the time. That's how they love it.
All right.
I want it my way.
About practical reality. I'm talking about rationally. Right.
And it's a bit of a sticking point when arguing with these folks.
Can you say delusional?
If they argue that not talking about God equals atheism, then talking about God equals theism.
Theism, certainly.
All right. Now here, this is the last one that I've marked. There were tons more, but I'm trying to keep this down to some of the more amusing and
just to give you an idea of some of the
and jaw-dropping ones.
Okay.
This is a biggie, but it's a little bit more complicated. So follow with me. Okay. The argument is, it is common knowledge that governmental acts may undergo a metamorphosis from religious to secular. The Sunday Blue laws are the best known example. Okay, now there's references to specific Supreme Court cases. The blue laws in Maryland were challenged on the basis that they were a violation of the separation of church and state.
Okay.
And they were upheld.
Okay.
And in the argument, they say, the court relied on numerous factors in concluding that Maryland's blue laws were no longer nourished by their religious roots, and reciprocally no longer nourished religious practices, nor perceived as doing so. Those factors were, and here's the factors. 1. Recent popular support of the laws was premised on secular considerations. So they're claiming the reason why people in that region wanted to keep their laws, their blue laws, was not because of religion, but because they had secular concerns.
Right.
You know, people driving around drunk on Sundays or on week, Now, of course, that does not apply in this case. There is I've never seen, at least, a secular reason why under God ought to remain in the pledge.
Right.
What is the secular purpose of keeping that in there?
It's an
I'm
oxymoron,
not aware of
right?
that.
I mean, secular reasons for things, secular statements, secular positions about things don't involve deities.
Yeah.
I mean,
by definition.
Straight up. Yeah.
By definition. Okay. 2. Judicial decisions dating to the mid-19th century interpreting the blue laws treated them as secular enactments. So they're saying, in cases related to the blue laws, when they talked about whether the blue laws were good or not, they talked about them from a secular perspective.
Okay.
Well, okay. That just raises a big question mark in mind. How they could talk about laws that were there because the religious people objected to the consumption of alcohol on their holy day, right? How they could talk about those secularly. But in any case, there are no judicial decisions related to the Pledge of Allegiance, at least relating to the phrase under God, that have interpreted the phrase under God as a secular enactment.
Right.
There's just no such thing.
So
this is not applicable.
Yeah, so again, the objection to the first point carries over.
Right. 3. The Blue Laws did not single out for prohibition activities offensive to religious sensibilities. Instead, they banned activities that would interfere with, quote, providing a Sunday atmosphere of recreation, cheerfulness, repose, and enjoyment. But that's just a restatement of the first thing, right? First they say, that's why the local people wanted to keep them. And then they say, well, that in fact is actually true.
Okay.
It doesn't seem to be the business of the lawyers in the case to decide that. But okay.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the biggie. Number 4. Amendments to the Blue Laws had systematically stripped them of religious references and content. So like the Blue Laws, when they went in, said, it's against the law to sell beer on Sunday because God doesn't like it.
Yeah, it's the Sabbath.
And later amendments to the laws took out the because God doesn't like it part.
Yeah.
And
Now think, how does this relate to under God in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Let's apply this one, shall
You'd
we?
think, right? What we're asking for is a change to strip the religious reference and content. Exactly the thing that one of the points considered by the judges in the case, that they're using the case as an example of why it should stay in.
Yeah, because seems to me the only way to
That's
strip
just nuts.
How do you strip? Yeah, the only way you strip a religious reference out of under God is
to take it out.
Yes, to not say that.
Right.
So, that's beautiful.
And 5. Yeah, that's the biggie, right? Because they're saying, here's why we should leave it in. We should leave it in because
they took it out.
Because the arguments in favor of keeping stuff like that worked because they had taken it out. These are lawyers writing this.
Yeah.
Okay,
and great lawyerese, right?
And 5, there was no readily available alternative to achieve the state's secular purpose. And again, they're claiming the secular purpose was, it would be nice if people didn't get drunk on Sunday, divorced from religious things. But again, there's no secular purpose to the phrase under God in the pledge. Or if there is, I've never heard it. All of the defenses of it have been in the form of, it doesn't mean anything. It's not hurting anybody. We're all used to it.
Yeah, it's
right?
ceremonial.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Not, if we take it out, it will cause some negative consequence other than making religious people angry.
Yeah, there have been a few people that said that it would cause negative consequences, though. But of course, it's just the sense that kids will be so upset and they will be so enhardened by having to learn the new pledge.
Says who?
No, in fact, they made that argument. I didn't mention that one. But
it's there, isn't it?
It's here.
Yeah.
They argued that. Actually, no. Let me rephrase that. And be fair to them. They argued. They did make that argument, but the purpose of that argument was to encourage the Supreme Court to take the case. Because they were saying, this is important for the Supreme Court to make a decision here, because if it just stands, then in California, or in the region covered by the Ninth Court, where
they will have a different
Ninth Circuit
pledge.
Court? Is that right?
Ninth Circuit.
Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
That in that region, those poor children will be thrown into confusion when they have to learn a new phrasing. But wait a minute. In 1954, weren't all the children thrown into exactly the same state of confusion by having to learn a new wording?
Yeah.
That's never stopped them before.
Yeah.
I don't see why.
Well, I think most kids are thrown into confusion just going to, just their first day of school in a new grade. It's like, okay, where's the lockers?
Yeah.
This is the least of their concerns.
Yeah. Again. So what we found out essentially is that the pro-theocracy people will say anything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yes, they will.
And the irony of their position is that they are trying to argue that the reason we should keep religious phrases in these public and compulsory recitations of the pledge is because they don't mean anything.
Yeah.
But they're somehow mean enough to make you get off your lazy butt and write an amicus brief, hire a lawyer, get it printed for a couple $1,000, and get it sent to the Supreme Court of the United States of America.
Right.
It obviously means something.
Yeah, you've got a lot of trouble that they're going to for something that doesn't mean anything.
Exactly.
So I had a lot of fun writing the ACA's amicus brief. What I did specifically was list those arguments, and explain why they were facetious.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to and proud to say that a lot of that has made it into the final legalized version. Of the document that will be submitted. The deadline for submitting the briefs is February 12th, which happens to be Darwin's Day. It was very nice. And then the oral arguments before the Supreme Court in this case will begin on March 24.
Right. So, well, maybe if we can, we might get your original first draft of it, and we can maybe put that up on the webpage if that's all right. If that can be done, for people to read.
And more importantly, I think the actual legalized version that we're going to get from the lawyer that's putting it together.
Will we be able to do that if it hasn't, if something that's like about to be argued? It's just an amicus brief. Maybe
absolutely. There's nothing secret about these. It's just not done yet. Right? The lawyer's still working.
Right. Okay. But obviously you've been getting regular updates on how it's going because well, that's terrific. So
I'd definitely like to see a copy of one.
Yeah. Well, we'll be sure and get that. And March 24th is a big day. Now, what a lot of people, what's very tricky, right, is that we already have one far right wing justice who has recused himself. Interestingly.
Thankfully.
He went on the record saying, that he had, they already had an opinion about how this ought to come out, which is a no-no for judges. You don't go in, as a judge, your job is to not be biased. And he expressed a bias. And Newdow called him on it, and he backed off. Which means he is one Supreme Court justice. And
he has got to be kicking himself so hard now because I'm sure he would like his opinion in the final decision.
There's a time to keep your mouth
shut.
But what is interesting now is that if the decision, if it turns out 3-3,
or 4-4.
4-4.
4-4. There's right. There's 9, not 7.
If the decision is split.
Right. If it's split right down the middle, then it stands.
Right. The Ninth Circuit Court.
The original ruling that pissed off all the everybody, that stands. And that is probably going to be pretty difficult for some people to comprehend and to fathom.
Well, I just have to ask religious folks out there to relax. We're not. Nobody is there's all these claims going around that there's some kind of assault on religion going on.
They're trying to take God out of America.
No, there is an increasing number of people who are not Christians, who have noticed that they're not being treated with equal rights by the government, and they're asking for their rights to be respected. And there's just a bunch of stuff that Christians have done over the years that they've gotten away with because it hasn't been challenged before, and that's being knocked down because it's illegal. That's all this is. Right?
And
you are free to go on believing whatever you want, but now that it's being challenged and it wasn't constitutional in the first place, it's going to have to come down.
But the Christians are going to listen to the Roy Moores of the world who will say things like, today it's my monument, tomorrow it's your church. They don't make that decision.
It's just not true. It's just not true.
It's fear-mongering. That's all it is.
Christians having a church does not impede my rights at all. Now, Christians having a church and having special dispensation on land use issues. Like they got in the Ruluipa ruling, religious land use, blah 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 thing, right? I mean, that does tread on my rights because that's giving special rights to religion, and that's going to have to come down. But just having a church, just believe in what you want to believe, doesn't bother me a bit. Go right ahead.
But they won't. What's amazing is they won't listen to you when you say, look, no one is trying to tell you that you can't believe in your God. No one's trying to tell you can't have church services. No one's trying to tell you that you can't have a nativity scene in your lawn. No one's trying to tell you that you can't wear a cross pendant.
Because they love that word public. They love how the government is considered public, and so we can't have any public expression of religion.
But they're confused. There's a difference between what you do on your own front lawn and what the government does.
The higher ups understand this, and they're just using that phrase because it so conveniently scares the hell out of everybody else.
Because they can use it in such a way to make you think any expression of religion outside of your bedroom.
Exactly.
They don't make the distinction between government, what the government can do,
Exactly.
In regards to religion and what it can't do.
Exactly.
And what any sort of free citizen can do.
Roy Moore can put up his 5-ton monument on his front lawn.
Nobody would have touched it.
Nobody's got a problem.
Nobody could have cared less.
Exactly. I could not care less. Have it up there. Go for it.
And
Make
I
it
have
3
tried.
times bigger.
I have tried via email to explain this very calmly to people who are Roy Moore supporters and to the fundamentalist Christians, and they're just like, "No, you're out there to form a police state." So
they're being told that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
They are being fed that line, and I think what we're seeing is the consequence of the part of religion, sort of in general, but Christianity in particular, that plays on a persecution complex.
Yes.
Right. I mean, a lot of Christianity is about how they succeeded in spite of the persecution of the Romans and stuff, and that's very important to them.
Why can't they just...
But it's unfortunate if it gets so important that they start imagining persecution where none is happening.
Yeah. Why can't they just give up? And Jesus didn't win out on his persecution, so why do they have to win? Why can't they just back down? Jesus didn't win against persecution and go to court and get out free.
Well,
he was sent to the cross.
But it was ultimately.
Why can't the Christians just lose?
But that was supposed to happen.
They can just as easily ask that of us.
Yeah,
right.
Sure,
Why don't we atheists just give in? Just go ahead, play along, believe in the God, keep our traps shut.
Yeah. That's what it is.
I mean, they have a right.
Sure.
They have a right to argue their position. They certainly do.
Of course.
But it's when it gets shrill and irrational that there's a problem.
And if the arguments are specious, they're going to get called on them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part
us
they
too.
don't like.
I hope that if we make bad arguments, that people will call on us and correct us.
Sure.
Exactly.
But
I hope that, and I hope that we don't get so, we don't latch onto some persecution complex where we start thinking that the only reason that people disagree with us is because we're biased. Well.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, that was a lot of good stuff, and
Thank you.
very worthwhile. And congratulations on the work you did.
It's been a privilege being able to be involved in this, and it's a very exciting thing for the ACA to do. And this is one for the history books.
Yeah, we'll see how it pans out. On the 24th will be a very interesting day. I have no idea how long it will take a decision to come down, but certainly they'll be hearing arguments on that day, and so we'll be keeping whatever's up to date on that.
Definitely.
You'll hear it from us.